The case of Victoria Hall, a 17-year-old girl from Suffolk County in England, is one that I know about but have never really seen covered anywhere. It's a really perplexing one, and it has some weird CCTV footage to go along with it. For decades, this was deemed a complete mystery, but there's actually been some recent developments that are very important, so I'll get to that, but first, let me explain to you what this poor girl went through. On the night of September 18th, 1999, a lively 17-year-old girl named Victoria Hall spent the evening with her best friend at a nightclub that they liked to frequent. Despite the fact that they may have been a little young to legally be in there, this was the 90s and it was a typical night out for the two teenagers. It was filled with music, dancing, and the carefree energy of most people their age. After a few hours of fun, the night would wind down and they left the club at around 1 a.m., stopping to grab some much-needed food before making their way home together. Just over an hour later, at approximately 2:20 a.m., as they neared their houses, the two girls parted ways. At this point, Victoria was just a short distance from her home, practically within sight of safety, and yet somehow, this ended up being the last time that this poor young girl would ever be seen alive. When Victoria's parents woke up the next morning, they quickly realized something was wrong. Her bed was untouched, and her belongings were exactly as they'd been the night before, prior to her leaving. Their stomachs sort of dropped as they realized that she'd never come home, but of course, she was a teenager, so they'd call around and give it a bit of time. After speaking to her friend though, they became very alarmed. They contacted the police and an immediate search effort ensued. On the very first day of the search, there were no signs of poor Vicky, no witnesses, and no obvious clues as to what had happened after she left her friend. But unfortunately, this was all about to change, and not in a good way. On the second day of the search, Victoria's clothing was found neatly folded in a ditch about 20 miles away. This was a very unusual sign, but not definitive yet, so there is still some hope. But sadly, after 5 more days of searching, Victoria Hall's remains were found. She was discovered in a ditch that was filled with water, and honestly, I can't even imagine what that poor friend felt after she got this news. An autopsy was later done, and it was confirmed that she'd indeed been the victim of a homicide, but as quickly as everything started, things went completely cold. There was no immediate suspects, and despite multiple leads, no arrests were ever made. This would lead to the beginning of one of Suffolk County's most distressing mysteries. For years, the case remained just that, a painful mystery. Victoria's family and the local community were left without answers, wondering who had taken her life that night and why. But in 2019, 2 decades after her death, Suffolk police reopened the investigation, and with advancements in forensic science and fresh investigative approaches, they re-examined old evidence and followed up on leads that had previously gone cold. And it seemed that this ended up working because in May of 2024, a major breakthrough was announced. Authorities charged 66-year-old Steve Wright with Victoria Hall's kidnap and murder. Steve Wright wasn't just anyone. He was known as the Suffolk Strangler and was already serving a life sentence for the 2006 homicides of 5 different women. This would make Victoria one of his earliest victims, and interestingly, around this time, investigators also linked him to the attempted abduction of a 22-year-old woman the night before Victoria's disappearance. So it appears that they're absolutely onto something here. In September of 2024, Wright pleaded not guilty to the charges in Victoria's case. A provisional trial date was set for February 2026 in London. Considering Vicky's family waited over 2 decades for justice, this was still ultimately a major step in the right direction. Victoria's case kind of serves as a reminder of just how long justice can take. Her parents have spent nearly 25 years fighting for answers, and for their sake, I truly hope that this time, they'll finally get a definitive answer. So this case happened relatively close to where I live, and although I don't know this family personally, I have friends who do, and it just always shook me. To imagine what this poor family went through towards the end is beyond comprehension. As far as I know, 0 YouTubers have covered this case. On the night of Thursday, September 3rd, 2020, the Traynor family, an amazing middle-class family of 6, were at their home in Oshawa, Ontario, setting in for what should have been a quiet evening. This family's as tight-knit as it gets, and although we don't know exactly what they were doing, it was a weeknight, so we can only surmise that they were going about their typical routines. With the young ones enjoying their last few days of summer, and the father, a high school teacher, prepping for the following week as well, but really trying to enjoy his last few days with his family before getting back into the busy school schedule. Again, we don't know exactly what was going on, but they would eventually get tired and head to bed, and one thing is for sure, They absolutely did not expect what was going to happen in the middle of the night. At 1:20 a.m., so now the early morning of Friday, September 4th, a sudden burst of gunfire echoed through this neighborhood. Neighbors were jolted awake immediately, very confused and alarmed as, despite being Oshawa, this was not the type of neighborhood where one would expect to hear gunfire. And oddly, it would turn out that these sounds had come from inside of the Traynor home, again, just a normal middle-class family of 6. Calls flooded into emergency lines reporting what sounded like some sort of active shooter situation, and when police arrived minutes later, they were met with an absolutely chilling scene, one that would take days to fully unravel. Inside the Traynor household, 4 members of the family were deceased. 50-year-old Chris Traynor, the teacher, 20-year-old Bradley, 15-year-old Adelaide, and 11-year-old Joseph. The mother, a woman named Loretta Traynor, had survived, but she was struck and in bad shape as well. The shooter was also found deceased, and it appeared to be at his own hands. It was immediately clear that this wasn't a case of a home invasion gone wrong. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no kicked-in doors, and whoever had done this had just walked right in, moved through the house, and carried out this horrible event with precision. For investigators, the immediate question was who the hell had done this and why. At first, the details didn't really make sense. There were no reports of threats against the family, no history of domestic violence, and no sign that anyone in the house had expected an attack. In fact, to many, this neighborhood was deemed so safe that people often left their doors unlocked. But quickly, authorities discovered the identity of the shooter, and the case started to make sense, but it took a very, very disturbing turn. The person responsible was 48-year-old Mitchell Lapa, a man who had come all the way from a different province. But what made this even more unsettling is that he wasn't just some stranger. Mitchell was Loretta Traynor's brother. He'd just driven more than 2,000 kilometers to Ontario, only arriving in the middle of the night. He entered the Traynor home as an uninvited guest and took almost all of his sister's family away from her. And just a side note, one thing I found heartbreaking about this is that her 4th child was away at college while this all went down. Loretta was obviously intended to be taken out as well, and if she had not survived this, imagine how he would have felt on top of what already happened. Given that his mother survived, at least they still had each other, but losing 4 people is still absolutely unbelievable. And you're probably wondering, why on earth did Loretta's brother do this? Investigators diligently worked to determine what could have driven him to commit such an act, and the motive they later confirmed centered around a financial dispute, specifically an inheritance issue regarding Loretta and Mitchell's father's estate that had created an absolute storm in Lapa's mind. Reports suggested that he had been deeply resentful over the way the will had been handled. We do know that their father made it clear who would receive what in the will 5 years before this happened. Loretta would get most of it, the sale of a cottage and a home, and Mitchell would get $30,000. It's not clear why he got less, but it is clear that his anger had festered for long enough that he decided to take the most extreme, irreversible, and horrible action possible, and bring these completely innocent kids into it. The Traynor family had literally no idea they were in danger that night before this. There was no previous reports of threats, no police involvement, and no documented history of violent behavior leading up to the. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong, and yet, in one night, nearly an entire household was wiped out. But some people disagree that there was no signs. In fact, some said they weren't surprised at all the second they heard about it. They had almost immediately guessed that it was Mitchell and that this man was very, very loose. He was said to be quite intelligent but abusive. In his younger days, apparently he once invited people to his family home for a party and then just shot fireworks at them, saying only, "Thanks for coming." And a young woman was severely burned, but he couldn't care less. He was said to be a disgusting person who bullied and victimized others just for the sake of it and was very creepy and weird. But to drive 2,000 kilometers to do something like this was still unthinkable. But there was definitely signs that he had the capacity to do something this bad. Loretta Traynor and her son Sam, who was away at school, survived, but at an unimaginable cost. They lost a husband and a father, 3 beloved children and siblings. They lost everything. In the days that followed this tragedy, Loretta released a statement thanking the community for their support, but no words could make sense of what had happened. This wasn't just a crime, it was something far more devastating, something that could never be undone. Both Loretta and Sam had an incredible amount of courage to get up and speak like they did at the funeral service, and I commend them for it. I sincerely hope that they have since been doing better, as it's been almost 5 years and I haven't heard anything since. This is just not something that you come back from quickly, if ever. This case remains one of the most horrifying instances in recent Canadian history.
And last week he said, you know, Mom, you always hear that you don't know what you got until it's gone. But we always knew. We knew we were loved.
This entry is just horrible. It's a freak accident that took place on a party bus. I feel like I slightly heard about this when it happened, but I'd just completely forgotten about it until someone in my comments recommended it. But man, is it just horrible in every single way. On the night of August 31st, 2012, a group of 65 New York high school students packed onto a double-decker party bus ready for a night of celebration. The mood was absolutely electric. Music blared, lights flashed, and teenagers laughed and danced as the bus made its way through New York City. It was supposed to be a night to remember, and for the group of teenagers, it was, but sadly, it was for all the wrong reasons. The students were headed to New Jersey for a Sweet 16 party. Daniel Fernandez, a popular junior at St. Francis Prep in Queens, was right in the middle of it all, enjoying the night with his friends. The party bus was stocked with all the things that a teenager would want. Music, friends, and just a sense of freedom that came with rolling through the city at night in this sweet bus. But then, literally in an instant, everything changed. At some point in the trip, Daniel and some of the other kids were on the top floor messing with the emergency hatch on the roof of the bus, wanting to open it, but the security guard on board was warning them to stop. Of course, being teenagers, they would wait till he looked away and try to open the hatch again. The cycle started to repeat, and eventually they got it. These weren't like the big doors that you'd see on the back of the bus, but it was a roof hatch that was there in case the bus fell on its side or the back doors were inaccessible. And obviously you can go on about how silly this sounds, but these were high school kids, and trust me, we all knew risky kids who did stuff like this. It doesn't make it right, but risky behavior is just part of being a teenage boy. Anyways, either way, the exact details of what happened next remain debated, but what is known is that Daniel moved towards the exit door and, either out of curiosity or excitement, stuck his head out of the roof hatch to have some fun and catch the wind. What he didn't realize was that this bus was approaching an overpass and he had no time at all to react. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Daniel was struck by the overpass neck up at full speed. The bus was still moving when this happened, meaning there was no time for anyone to stop him or warn him. 1 second he was there laughing with his friends, and the next, Daniel was gone. Chaos absolutely erupted inside the bus. Screams filled the air as students tried to process what had just happened, and I cannot even begin to imagine what these poor kids witnessed. The driver, unaware that Daniel had even opened the exit, was forced to pull over as panic began. Another bus stopped too, and quickly people were spread out everywhere on the highway, or freeway if you're American, in a complete panic. First responders arrived quickly, but obviously there was unfortunately nothing they could do. In the days that followed this accident, grief hit the community like a wave. Hundreds gathered for his funeral, with classmates, teachers, and family members struggling to comprehend how such a senseless accident could have even happened to begin with. In fact, this funeral was so shocking that his own grandmother fainted from grief at the service. Also, there was tweets popping up from people who witnessed it, and man, my hearts go out to these people. This was over a decade ago now, but this is bad, and it's just something that never leaves you. Also, this is how Twitter looked when I was in high school, and I just completely forgot about it. Beyond just the sadness though, there was also a growing sense of anger. Questions arose about whether proper safety measures had been in place on the bus. The emergency exit was supposed to be just that, an emergency exit. The bus driver later stated that he hadn't been aware that Daniel had even moved towards the exit, let alone the fact that he'd opened it. And others pointed to the bus company itself, questioning whether there were enough safeguards in place to prevent something like this from happening. But I don't know about any of this, come on. The emergency exit has to be ready for use at any given time. They've all been on a bus before, and there was a security guard warning them multiple times. The kid just did something risky, and unfortunately, he paid the price in a way that no one should ever have to. The reality remained the same. A moment of recklessness, excitement, or simple misjudgment had ended a young life. And no matter where the blame fell, Daniel Fernandez was not coming back. In the years since, Daniel's accident has served as a haunting reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. And for a case like this, it's hard to have any closure or any sort of justice. The poor family is just left with memories of their amazing 16-year-old boy who made a bad mistake and never made it home. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. If you enjoy these kind of videos, please consider liking or subscribing, but if not, that's totally fine. Just watching is good enough. I upload 2 videos just like this every week, and I'd love to have you back. I also just want to give another massive shout out to all of my patrons. I can't even put into words how grateful I am for the community I've developed over the past 5 to 6 months.